Welcome to Policy RX with the Rock Doc. I'm Eric Murdoch coming to you from the doctor's office in Estes Park, Colorado. In this episode, we have Kai Lightner in the house. As most people know, Kai was a youth world champion climber, I think in 2014. It turns out he was the first American to win the youth world championship since Chris Sharma, I think in 1995. But since then, he's won many championships, national championships, continues to crush it in competitions as well as outside with 514D and 515A sends. So we are so grateful, Kai, for you to join us here on Policy RX.
Thank y'all for having me.
So let's just get into it. When I first met you, and we were just talking about it, I didn't realize, I thought you were a freshman in college, but you were a senior in high school in 2017 when you joined Climb the Hill, the event that was sponsored by the Access Fund and the American Alpine Club, where we took climbers to Washington, D.C. to lobby. And I was kind of reflecting on that, and I'm wondering if you, now that it's been almost 10 years or 8 years since you were first in D.C. and saw that political process, do you have any reflections on that event and maybe how it impacted sort of the way you think about the American political process and your place in it?
Yeah, I think my involvement in Climb the Hill was kind of the beginning of me understanding how closely tied climbing and policy are, because I feel like a lot of times people think that climbing is this completely separated oasis away from society, when in reality our access to public lands, our access to these climbing areas is contingent on federal policies, federal protections for outdoor spaces, and we would not have access to some of our most legendary and sacred spaces in climbing if it wasn't for legislation that was passed to protect them. And so being a part of that at such a young age, I think it really just helped me understand that better and really understand how it's all connected, and how I feel like climbing isn't just a separated existence from society, but it's a microcosm of the life we all live in this country.
Yeah, really well said. And, one of the questions I've asked some other guests, like, for example, Lynn Hill, who's seen climbing evolve since the 70s, I asked, like, how has it changed? You have a different perspective because you started climbing in this century. You've probably been climbing, I don't know, 20 years or so?
Yeah, just about. Mm-hmm.
How have you seen, so you've been able to sort of be part of the climbing community, but also, as you just mentioned, you sort of have this greater perspective on how we can impact the rest of the world and how we can use climbing to affect change. What are your thoughts on how climbing has evolved, and what have you seen, if it has evolved at all, during your time kind of being part of the climbing community?
What's crazy is that even though I'm only 25 years old, if 6-year-old me looked at what the sport looked like today, it would be completely unrecognizable. I remember a time when I was beginning climbing where climbing gyms in metropolitan areas was unheard of. You didn't see climbing gyms in the middle of New York City or Atlanta or any of these places, because most people just assume that why would you want to climb in a dusty gym when you could climb outside? And so a lot of times if you wanted to train in the gym, you had to find that one little outskirts, hollowed out warehouse with like a wall or something. And so to see, I even remember back in 2010 when I believe it was Stone Summit, when Darren was first creating the concept of having these mega commercial gyms where you invest millions of dollars in a facility, and everyone was like, you're dumb. You're wasting your money, you're wasting your time. No one would ever, you never make money from it because there's not a big enough clientele or interest. And obviously they were wrong. But to see how the sport has come from then till now, where there's so many gyms, there's so many people, there's such a massive influx of climbers. Climbing is an Olympic sport. I feel like climbing has become so much more, I feel like, legitimized in the eyes of the public. And it's been kind of incredible to see how much the sport has grown since I was a kid. And I feel like obviously there are some growing pains when it comes to accommodating for that many people in our outdoor spaces, being much more mindful of responsible recreation and leaving no trace and a lot of those sustainable policies. But I think it's also opened a door for a lot of opportunities to expose the valuable parts of climbing to communities that could really use that, whether it's how based in community climbing is, how much it just fosters togetherness, collaboration, trust, even just like combining people from completely different backgrounds and communities and making us all feel like one space. I feel like climbing is unifying in a way that I feel like few other sports demand. You're always having your life in someone else's hands and vice versa. And so I think that those qualities are something that could really be valuable for communities, for marginalized communities, from people who feel like they need that space for themselves. And I'm just really happy that climbing's at a space where that can be almost like working to be destigmatized and be spread out to more communities.
Yeah, I love that about you, that you're not just crushing it in the gym or on the rocks, but you have a bigger perspective on climbing. And so I think that's a good segue to talk about your organization, the organization that you founded, Climbing for Change in 2020. And talk to me a little bit about how you did it. It was a gutsy move to start a nonprofit and to take on the responsibility of running an organization and creating a mission. Why did you do it, and what was that experience like?
I started Climbing for Change in 2020, but I feel like what motivated me to start my organization was really just my lived experience growing up in this sport as a black person, as someone as a part of a marginalized community, and being a bit of an outlier in climbing. When I first walked into a climbing gym, when I first walked into a climbing competition, I was the only black person in the room, really one of the only people of color in the room. And that was a reality that really persisted for my entire career for the most part. And when it came to 2020, when there were beginning to be more demands for racial justice, racial equity, trying to be more inclusive or create more inclusive spaces in the outdoor industry, I felt like I was a lot of people's first call because I was one of the few black people that they knew and that had been in the sport for a really long time and that worked with so many people at different levels of the sport. And so I ended up working with a lot of companies behind the scenes, helping to write a lot of mission statements, helping to develop a lot of programs. And I was so engaged with this because I was in school for business. I had been such a consistent figure in the sport. It just became one of those things where, well, if I'm going to take on this responsibility, I really want to do it in a way that's consolidated and most impactful, which is why we started to create Climbing for Change and the infrastructure, and then we launched it in the summer because I felt like I've been so blessed to be able to get to this point in my career where I feel like I have the opportunity to pay it forward and give back to the communities that helped build me into who I am. And I felt like this was just a really cool opportunity to be able to create something where I could open the door for other people to be able to come into this space and feel like they have a space where they belong. And so, yeah, the whole mission of Climbing for Change is just trying to make the industry more inclusive and open doors for more communities to be represented at every level of the sport. And we do that through grant opportunities. We do that through consulting work with helping companies create programs or grassroots organizations get the connections or funding or the blueprint that they need to be more impactful. We do project-based opportunity grants, try to get people jobs. We do all kinds of work, honestly. And a lot of the work that we do involves us being middlemen in the industry where we connect people, we provide funding, we provide resources, do what we can behind the scenes so that we can leave programs and ecosystems as self-sustainable as possible so they don't always need our hand involved. Even our program in Atlanta, where we partner with the local government and the local climbing gym chain, well, Stone Summit, which is now Central Rock Gym, and One Climb, built this climbing wall in this recreation center that was walking distance from this low-income area, and then providing after-school programming, providing climbing clubs, and providing a segue for them to be able to get into the sport in the gyms. I feel like we just try to do everything that we can to try to combat some of the history of exclusion that exists in our outdoor spaces in our sport, and hopefully make our sport as representative as the rest of our society is.
Yeah, it sounds like your work is really far-reaching, but it's still focused on this mission that you have. With all these different issues, obviously you're focused on that mission. I saw recently that you're sort of interested in posting on social media about some of the current policies and and current court decisions that are going on right now. Can you speak to a little bit about sort of how you're feeling about what's going on right now in our country? I know that you weighed in on some Supreme Court decisions that would sort of um, limit the power of the judicial branch and maybe uplift the power of the executive branch. It sounds like you're interested in those sorts of issues too, which I know are tied to also in some ways to the mission of climbing for change in the first place.
Gosh, with all that's going on, that's such a loaded question.
That's a big one.
I fe- I feel like, I mean, we talked about earlier how closely tied climbing and policy are, and it's all interconnected in so many ways. And I think it's just really disheartening watching so much of our public land, so much of our civil rights, so many things that so many of us hold dear to us be on the fringe of being deconstructed and completely eradicated. I mean, my aunts and uncles and people of my grandparents' age are still alive who were, hosed down during the civil rights movement, who fought for our rights to be able to vote, to be able to have access to these spaces, to be able to just be able to exist in spaces like climbing, to be honest. And so to see a lot of those protections be rolled back, to be put at risk, is really disheartening. And yeah, I I don't know. It seems like we're just in a space where a lot of things are in limbo, and I don't really have a consolidated answer for this one
Yeah.
because there's so much going on.
This is a good answer, and I think like how do you decide what to step out on? I guess that's the question of there's so many issues that you could jump on right now. As you said, there's so many things going on with the environment and public lands and recreation access and civil rights and voting rights. How are you able to sort of focus where you want to put your platform and how you want to affect the way the American community is sort of moving forward?
Well, I think that one thing that someone reminded me of recently that I try to keep in mind is the fact that there have been plenty of generations prior to me who have had to fight for rights that they realized that they would never see. That they fight for a space that they hoped would exist one day but had no guarantee of. And keeping that hope alive, keeping the ball rolling and us inching towards the progress that we want, sometimes that has to be enough. And I think that for me, that's something I've been keeping in mind even when it comes to times like this when so much seems uncertain and so much seems just like it could be gone in an instant. And so I think in terms of like what I pick and choose, I think I just try to keep people informed at the moment about what's going on, about what we should be concerned about, and what we should be targeting in the moment. Obviously, everyone's priorities are going to be different, but I just think right now I'm just like trying my best to, you know, keep my head above water. I think a big concerning thing for me, especially when it comes to climate for change, is this whole reframing of DEI and how it's kind of almost been turned into a slur as opposed to a marker of progress. Because especially from multiple angles, not only as someone who grew up in diverse communities, who knows that there's so much talent and perspective that's being lost when you limit those opportunities, but also as someone who graduated from business school, who's seen the numbers, who's worked in these spaces, and understands that statistically, the more diverse ideas you bring into a room, the more your business is likely to thrive. It's directly correlated in every industry, in every framework. And I think that it's just disheartening when people completely dismiss entire groups of people, entire groups of ideas, because it limits progress and it takes away opportunities not only from people that people like to separate themselves from, but for all of us. You know, we're all connected in this game, and it's like that idea of like you're only as strong as your weakest link. It's like if you're not bringing us all towards progress at the same time, the ball is bound to drop somewhere. And so I'm just like I'm just hoping that like if I can continue doing the work that I'm doing at Climate for Change, to continue trying to foster community in times where people need it the most, in times where things feel the most uncertain and people are being targeted in ways that we haven't seen in a really long time. I feel like that's really the the most I can do at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this before, but you're wise beyond your years. I'd love to chat with you more, but we'll wrap it up now with the final question that we ask all our guests. It's, what are your plans for the near future? You got any climbing plans or any travel plans or any plans to go on any vacations in the near future?
Well, right now I've just been rehabbing my ankle. I had ankle surgery at the beginning of the year, and so just like coming back from that, ligaments are a little complicated. But I've been rehabbing my ankle. I've been climbing outside more, and I've also been doing some competition climbing as well. It's been a really long time since I've done competitions, but I think for me, I'm just motivated to go where my passions take me. I feel like I'm at a point in my career where I feel more motivated by what excites me on a daily basis and gives me joy as opposed to a number grade or a result. And so I'm kind of just letting my whims determine my direction.
Thanks for joining us. You are a great spokesperson for the climbing community. I'm really appreciative that you're around and that you're willing to join us today at Policy RX. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
you're welcome. So climbers, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for our next one, and everyone take care.